I'm really proud. We've managed to assemble a really top-notch panel for you today. I mean, the energy transition is such a broad topic, and what we've tried to do is get you people who are involved in making that energy transition happen in Latin America from different parts of the region and in different industries. So first of all, I would like to introduce Keith Marshall. Keith is the CEO of SolGold, and SolGold is a London-listed mining company that is developing one of the largest new copper projects in Latin America, and they're developing that in Ecuador. Next, I would like to introduce Alfredo Mordezki. Alfredo is, Alfredo used to be just your normal, typical Latin American-focused fund manager, focused on fixed equity events. Recently, this year, Alfredo is launching for Santander Asset Management. He's launching a Latin America-focused ESG fund. So this is really useful because Alfredo can explain to us what ESG investors are looking for when they're funding mining projects, oil and gas projects, renewable energy projects. And finally, but definitely not least, we have Marcela Vaca. Marcela Vaca is the General Director of GeoPark. If you don't know about GeoPark, you should do, because it is the largest independent Latin American focused oil company. It's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So obviously you've got the majors like BP and Shell that will have their assets in Latin America, in Africa, and Asia. GeoPark is just focused on Latin America. It's operating in 5 different countries in the region. And I'm delighted that Marcela can be with us here today to explain that oil and gas too has an important role in its energy transition. So I think without any further ado, I'm going to go to Marcela first, because when people think about clean energy, they do not think about oil and gas. And I'd just like you to explain to us, Marcela, why are you here today? Why is oil and gas relevant and important when we talk about the energy transition?
Well, can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, well, thank you. And hello, James, and hello, Keith and Alfredo, and thank you for having me here with you today. And congratulations to Erasmo, a beautiful business and a great speech. Thank you. Well, regarding your question and just following up on what everybody said on earlier, Latin America is by far is a great place on the planet to invest in oil and gas. Some of the biggest hydrocarbon resources, and as you well know, and probably better than me, as just a welcoming business and a stable regulatory environment. Of course, we have the tools, we have the talent, and there's virtually no competition for us and the economics and the financial returns. But also Latin America, being this amazing place, and I am from Colombia, so I'm in love with Latin America. Being this amazing place, it is also a place with very stringent environmental regulations. At least in the oil industry, we are by far, in almost every country in where we operate, the most regulated and supervised and audited industry of all. So there is no way that, at least in the countries where we operate, and you mentioned it, we operate in, we have investments in Brazil, in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, and Argentina now. We have a very, very tight regulation and supervision, and all that the crude that we produce is definitely ESG compliant. It's part of the challenges and of the commitment to operating in Latin America, but definitely it's also we would also have to make a point on the variety of crudes that we produce. Anywhere in Latin America, we produce from the heavy sour Mexican Maya grade crude that's produced in Mexico to the very light sweet shale oil gas from Vaca Muerta. Obviously, the light crudes it's easier to refine, produces less emissions, less sulfur, and as you get heavier, the refining produces but more impact. GeoPark produces various grades of crude across our operations. We produce light crudes and heavy crudes. That's part of how we manage our risk and how we diversify between oil and gas as well, and across different grades. In Colombia, the Vasconia, the mix that is mostly sold is the Colombia Vasconia grade. And I talk about Colombia basically because 80% of our production comes from our 23 concessions or blocks in the Colombian basin. So a great deal of our production is medium gravity, which flows through the Colombian Vasconia grade. This quality, which is traditionally sold in the U.S. Gulf, has also been sought after by buyers across the region, and it is a very good replacement for the barrels that are missing from Venezuela and arising from other OPEC cuts and so forth. We expect this crude quality, the quality that we produce, and all of our basket to continue to be valued in the market. And as you mentioned, in the context of the energy transition, as the crude demand shifts from consumer transportation and gasoline, because in the short term, in the medium term, you would expect countries and public policy to be enacted to promote EVs, then the crude demands, we believe, would move more towards those sectors that are a bit more difficult to electrify, like the air transportation, like the petrochemicals. Those sectors use medium crudes with good yields and distillates, and these crudes, which we produce the most, and you say in the AP gravities should be around 18 and 22 API, for those who are related to the oil industry and understand that is what I'm saying, a medium mix. Those medium crudes with the yields and distillates should continue to be valued by the market versus very light crudes that yields high portions of gasoline. And this is, I'm talking 10, 15 years from now. And because that is exactly the market where biofuels like Erasmus and new technologies would come in. So only to close, yes, the Latin America has a very stringent environmental protection. Our industry is very heavily supervised. There is no way that Latin American crude would be produced if it were not ESG compliant, and we should work constantly to make it more and more so compliant. And then as to the impact, then the medium grade crudes should take some dominance into the future in Latin America.
Marcela, that is fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating, because when I wrote some articles for this energy transition report recently, I learned that even in the most optimistic scenario, by 2050, oil and gas is still responsible for 40% of primary energy demand. So oil and gas is still going to be here for the next couple of decades at least. So it's fascinating to hear from you what oil and gas that will be and what the market will start to look like. And I really want to go to Alfredo and ask him, how an ESG investor chooses which oil companies to invest in. But before I do that, I'm just going to bring in Keith. Because Keith, you are obviously developing a huge copper project. The big rationale for copper's got lots of uses, but the reason why people are bullish about copper at the moment is electric vehicles and electrification. I just want to ask you, if the whole reason that we are producing more copper is for environmental reasons, then obviously that copper has to be produced in an environmentally friendly manner. So I just want to ask you in very simple terms, what are the environmental benefits of your copper project or of Ecuadorian copper? Well, what are the environmental benefits of that?
The environmental benefits of the Alpala project are basically we're in the process of developing the project. So we're in a study stage. We're looking at what we call the pre-feasibility study stage. And that basically means that we're at the start of the development of the mine. And that means that we've got a chance to look at all the developing technologies and all the different energy sources, and we can try and set ourselves up to be operating in, hopefully in the next 10 years, in the most environmentally friendly way. And by, for example, at the moment, in the underground mines around the world, all of the equipment is powered by diesel. And you all know about diesel particulate emissions, and we have the same. The underground mining world was one of the first industries to recognize the downside of the diesel particulates. And so we pushed hard to improve the quality of our engines. And we were able to filter out and clean up the engines such that we were able to drop the diesel particulates. I don't know the exact number, but I suspect by about 75%. The next stage for underground mining is the electrification, and that's to move towards battery technology or cable technology that would allow us to use electrical equipment underground, which then cleans up all of the underground atmosphere for the underground workers. So that's one of the ways that we're looking at becoming more environmentally friendly, using more renewable energy. Certainly in Ecuador, a large proportion of our electricity comes from hydropower. We're looking at the potential for SolGold to be involved in the building of one or even two hydro schemes that will allow us then to use more and more renewable energies. So how are we going to help? I think I look at us as being, as SolGold and the mining industry being, number one, the supplier of as the green metal of copper for renewable energies. I see her as a taker of the new technologies and helping develop those new technologies or applications in the underground sense and in the processing sense. And then I see us as being investors in the renewable energy sector in Ecuador for more hydropower. So that in a nutshell is how we try and encapsulate the opportunity that we have as SolGold for developing what I certainly hope will be one of the most environmentally friendly mining operations in the world.
That is perfect. Thank you, Keith. And it's funny, some of the techniques that you mentioned there, such as electrification of certain parts of the operations, I believe also happen in the oil industry and also happen at GeoPark. And this allows me to go directly to Alfredo. So look, Alfredo, we've got two extractive industries here in Latin America. When you're choosing which firms to invest in and for your ESG fund, how do you choose which mining companies or which oil and gas companies you can honestly say, yes, I can invest in them because they fulfill my criteria as an ESG investor? Let us into that decision-making process.
Of course. So thank you very much for the invitation first. I'm very honored by being part of this panel. I don't want to speak against what Marcela talked, because we have been investing in GeoPark for a long time. We know the company very well. We know the management very well. We know their track record. They're an excellent company, and they have been delivering over time. And we have been with them since they were half what they are now. So we know them very well. But honestly, when we think about ESG, think about Latin America pretty much producing around 7 million barrels of oil a day. I mean, all in all, adding Brazil, Mexico, well, Venezuela is not a very strong producer right now. But if you think about pretty much 7 million, Argentina as well, you have to think about how is the industry positioned in terms of climate change. You have to think, what is their strategy in terms of climate change? And we need to look for a benchmark as everything. So it's good sometimes in Latin America that we come to the market a bit later, because we have, like, the world has been moving and has been setting some sort of benchmark for us to somehow relate and understand where we are. So if we look at the majors as a benchmark, and we look at how they have been acting in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation, we have seen mainly three pillars. And these three pillars have been investing in renewables first. So the majors have been one of the most, I mean, the strongest investors in renewables. We have to keep this in mind. Second, they have been developing clean hydrogen as an alternative. And third, they have been active in a process that I don't want to judge too much because I have some reservations, but it's true that it also adds to the clean energy landscape, which is carbon sequestration. So these three pillars somehow are the credentials that the majors are showing in the oil and gas industry. I tell you exactly what is that we have seen in the developed markets that we are really missing in Latin America: a taxonomy. We have seen mainly the European Union coming for that taxonomy. We will see the UK very shortly come with a taxonomy. We have seen the CBI, the Climate Bond Initiative, come with a taxonomy. It doesn't matter whether it's exactly the same or not, but this is the line in the sand that actually draws which activities are in the right side, in the right side of the climate change mitigation and adaptation, and which ones will fall into the wrong side of the climate change mitigation and adaptation. And this is very important because what I want to understand is not exactly the credentials that the companies will have now, but I want to sit with a company and listen to them. How much of their capex for 2023, 2024 will be considered part of the taxonomy? How much is aligned to the transition into a low carbon economy? But this is what we need. So if they have, for instance, if I'm sitting with, and then we go to the next issue that is very relevant in Latin America, and part of the panelists part of the attendees have been asking as well about the sovereign policies. Well, this is important because in Latin America, we have, if we talk about this 7 million, most of the 7 million is in the hands of national oil integrated companies. So it's really companies owned by the nations. But still, it doesn't mean that they have not been moving on the right direction. There have been some movement, which is very, very welcome. And one of the examples of I want to talk about the good examples. I'm not going to pursue, punish the bad guys. There's always bad guys and good guys. Let's listen to the good guys. So in Colombia, we really have seen an alignment between the national oil integrated company and lately the government, especially the Minister of Industry, in really fostering the energy transition and talking about the things we want to listen. So if, James, you ask me, what are the things you ask? Well, this is the kind of things we want to listen to. What are you doing in terms of renewables, in terms of fostering and changing your matrix, your national matrix? And Colombia has been doing a lot. And this is very interesting. Then we could discuss whether there is the ambition is sufficient or not. But I think that the direction of trade is this one. It's very, very clear. And it's
so Alfredo, sorry to interject, but when you, just for our attendees, you're talking about Ecopetrol, the Colombian national oil company.
Yes. Yes.
And they're your example of the kind of a good example of a Latin American oil company that's heading in the right direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And all the metrics, also comparable metrics that I can support from a quantitative point of view, are also showing the same path.
Well, Alfredo, before we move on to mining, because I want to ask you the same question about mining, before we do, let's give Marcela a right of reply, or not even a right of reply, but Marcela, what are your thoughts on that investor perspective?
I completely agree with Alfredo, and it's good to see that you know us very well, so you know that what I'm saying is absolutely true. But yes, Latin America has been lagging a bit in aligning governments into climate change initiatives, and now it has. Colombia particularly has a very clear alignment between national companies, government commitments, international commitments, and now the private industry. And in the private industry, we, as let's say the biggest, the largest operator in Colombia, private operator in Colombia, we have aligned ourselves with the government metrics in doing a lot of things, like, for example, reducing our carbon footprint and changing our fuel. We changed from diesel to gas. Now we're changing to electrification as we meet the national grid, which is 60% sourced with renewable energies. Then we build our pipeline, which transports like 80% of our production, in reducing all the trucks that we use. You can imagine the amount of trucks to truck nearly 70,000 barrels, 45% of which is ours. And then we have already set ourselves for this year to establish our decarbonization strategy. So, like, in the sense that Alfredo is saying, the industry should be able to start measuring itself vis-a-vis what not only investors, but what the governments are expecting from us and what consumers are expecting from us. So we should be able to demonstrate with numbers what is a real commitment. We are a fairly young company, so all these measures have to be the right size for us. I think it would be far-stretched to say that we are going to get into, investing in renewable energies like the majors. In fact, it is the space that the majors are living behind in the kind of projects that are becoming a niche for independent companies like ours. But what is the challenge? The challenge is that companies like us be able to do it cost efficient, be able to do it clean, and be able to do it what we like to say, kind. We have to be ESG compliant. So if we are cheap, clean, and kind, I'm sure that we can take that space that the majors can have been leaving behind and provide the energy that continents like Latin America are going to be demanding in the next 40 years to be able to provide that development that is so strongly needed. And in that sense, I completely agree with you, Alfredo. We should all be on board with all these initiatives. We should be able to measure them. We are working very strongly in having in measurements, and who is going to succeed is not only who can provide the indicators, but is who's truly committed to do it in a cheap, clean, and a kind way.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcela. Alfredo, it's great to see you doing my job as a moderator of this panel and basically challenge everyone. But let's keep it going. So now let's look at Keith. So let's look at copper, electric vehicles. What are your criteria when it comes to investing in miners or copper miners, the type of project that Keith had just told us about?
Well, first, let me say one thing that I think that Keith mentioned, and I want to highlight as how important it is. He spoke about the sourcing of the energy. As everybody knows, miners are big consumers of energy. So the strategy of which type of energy is sourced is very significant. So how important it is, how this ESG approach has evolved since when we start many years ago, people were thinking about scope 1 emissions. So people will go to people like managers like Keith and will ask, how many emissions are you sending to the atmosphere as a result of your everyday work? They will never ask how many emissions are sent to the atmosphere as a result of the energy you're buying. So we moved from scope 1 to scope 1+2 in terms of reporting. And this is so significant because, I mean, if you look at in Latin America, there is a lot of multinational companies that are in the mining sector, and their own shareholders have been pushing for very much transparency in terms of the sourcing of energy that they are buying. And by reporting scope 1 plus scope 2, meaning that the energy that you, I mean, along your value chain, that means that it makes a lot of sense for the industry to try to manage and push their suppliers into a greener landscape. So this has been also a driver of a greener landscape in the mining industry, not only for the miners themselves, but also for energy generators that have been pushed into providing a cleaner matrix. So this is very important, and I think it's something that we want to point out. In terms of what we look at when we look at miners, I tell you the first weight that we put in our materiality matrix is water management. As you know, I mean, all miners are also very much consumers of fresh water, and this is the most important thing we need to monitor from a pure environmental point of view. If you look at the S, at the social part, we look at health and safety measures. And if you look at the G part, I mean, we look at the board, the way the board is composed, business ethics and corruption. As you know, I mean, it's every industry that has a close relationship with state agencies has to be monitored on that side. And by doing that, we are also imposing, I mean, we have this ambition of going into a better future for Latin America, better standards of governance, better positioning on Transparency International in terms of corruption, better use of water. I mean, we need to be ambitious because, I mean, at the end, we discovered the power that investors do have, which I'm not saying that non-clean industries will not have, a place in the future. I'm not saying that, but this huge pool of investment that is represented by the ESG funds, I mean, will be a really significant advantage in terms of funding in the future. I think we are not yet seeing that, but it's going to come. We're going to see very much, I mean, a differentiated pool of investments, and the cost of them will be very, very different for the cost of funding for the company.
Perfect. Thank you, Alfredo. And that's what we need, right? Strong financial incentives are what's going to drive the energy transition. Look, we've got a couple of questions come through from the audience, so I'm going to ask them now before getting back to my debate. And I'd just like to say to anyone watching, please send through your questions in the chat. Please tell us your name and your company. So Marcela, we've got quite a technical question here.
Okay.
Do you see heavier crudes becoming stranded assets as the market shifts to medium crudes, as you suggested?
It is a possibility that really extra heavy crudes might pose a problem because of the abundant use of water and the likelihood of limitations in the market. Fortunately, that is not in our in her basket of crudes. It may be, but it also, as I explained, those heavy crudes have very high yields of distillates that will be needed in those industries that will not be easily electrified. So there is going to be something like a tension, I guess, between making that production sustainable and feeding a market that will still need some of those heavy crudes for refineries. But yes, those heavy crudes become largely, not only because of production, but also because of transportation. It just becomes more and more difficult to produce.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcela. Another oil type question, but this time it's biofuels. So Erasmo and hopefully the translation team. Erasmo, this is a question for you. We were being asked, how quickly, Erasmo, do you think it will be possible for commercial planes to use 100% biofuels? So we're not talking about small planes, we're talking about 747s. How quickly will that be a reality?
Nós já utilizamos, James, os biocombustíveis verdes. Hoje estamos utilizando os biocombustíveis de primeira geração, que é o etanol e o biodiesel. E no hemisfério norte já se utiliza os biocombustíveis de segunda geração. Estados Unidos, Canadá, Europa. Aqui na América Latina, a partir de 2024, com a nossa unidade operando, nós já vamos ter os biocombustíveis avançados também. E nós acreditamos que temos um potencial gigante para expandir os biocombustíveis avançados. E eu concordo com o que a Marcela colocou, e obrigado, Marcela, pelas palavras sobre a minha apresentação, que nós temos que trabalhar juntos. Nós vamos utilizar petróleo por muito tempo, e nós precisamos do petróleo porque a demanda de energia é crescente, mas os biocombustíveis são parceiros da indústria de petróleo para nós fazermos essa transição energética e utilizarmos cada vez mais, ou aumentarmos a utilização do biocombustível e dos combustíveis líquidos.
This is great to see business being done on this panel. But Erasmo, just to clarify something, and forgive my ignorance. So are you telling me that there are planes, and please do forgive my ignorance, this is a question from the audience, so I could blame it on the audience, but I'll be honest, I didn't know this either. Are you telling me that there are 747s running on 100% biofuels? Or is it a mix of biofuels with jet fuel?
Eu posso comentar. Eu, há 15 dias, estive numa live com Boeing, Embraer e a Gol. Sim, hoje já existem os aviões, eles têm uma garantia de fábrica para utilizar 50% de biojet. E a Boeing anunciou nessa live que em 2030 todos os seus aviões podem utilizar até 100% de biojet. E nós acreditamos que esse é um mercado muito interessante para os biocombustíveis avançados, porque a gente vê soluções para veículos leves elétricos, mas para veículos pesados e o transporte aéreo, nós acreditamos que o combustível líquido é o combustível que vai ser utilizado por décadas e, portanto, o biocombustível pode ajudar esses segmentos a reduzir e muito as emissões. Só um comparativo para o público que está nos acompanhando: o biocombustível, dependendo de qual a fonte da matéria-prima, ele pode reduzir em mais de 100% as emissões de gases de efeito estufa. Então, nós temos um impacto ambiental muito grande.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Erasmo. Keith, we've got a cheeky question for you, which I wouldn't ask myself, but in this particular moment, I'm just acting as a conduit for the audience's questions. And so a gentleman has asked, because Keith, you're the interim CEO, and this gentleman has asked, do you plan to continue in the role? If the job was offered to you, would you continue in the role?
I've been involved with SolGold now for about 3 months. It's a fascinating company. I'm very interested in the work of the CEO, but I think I actually support the company better using my technical expertise to help with the mining side of the company. And I think a more rounded person with more financial and investor experiences could probably make a better job in the CEO role. So we are looking for a replacement. The board and the company and the investors seem happy with me as an interim, but from my point of view, I think that a handover in the next 3 to 6 months is probably the best thing for the company.
Perfect, thank you. Well, look, that's that section of audience questions. We are going to continue fielding questions from the audience, so please keep them coming. Now moving back to my questions, Keith, I'm going to stick with you for a bit. So I am actually, as fate would have it, I am not sitting in London, I am sitting in Ecuador, just exactly where you happen to have your project. And I've noticed something in Ecuador, which I've also seen before on my trips to Colombia, and is pretty much true throughout the region. It's the following. Everybody, if you ask anyone on the street in Ecuador, they would be in favor of electric vehicles, less pollution, renewable energy. People love all those sorts of themes. Then if you say to them, great, I'm going to build a mine, half of them want to chop your head off. Like sorry, I'm being a bit flippant, but the anti-mining sentiment here is quite strong. So there's this kind of paradox where everybody wants these projects, and I'm sure the same applies to Erasmo. I'm not so, there is some opposition to biofuels where people assume that you're cutting down the rainforest or you're taking away food supplies. I'm sure similar stuff happens with GeoPark's projects, but specifically, Keith, with you, there is this paradox, this disconnect. People want electric vehicles. Lots of people don't want mining projects. My question is, what do you as an industry have to do, especially in Latin America, to change that, to convince people? And it's really relevant in Ecuador, because why are mining companies going to Ecuador? Because Ecuador is undiscovered. Ecuador doesn't have a large formal mining industry. All of the new exciting discoveries, they're not going to be found really in Chile or Peru, which are more established. You're more likely to find them in a frontier jurisdiction like Ecuador. But the trouble with frontier jurisdictions is that they don't have a strong mining culture, and therefore they're against mining projects. So this isn't just a one-off in the case of your project. This is an inherent structural paradox that we're facing. What can the industry do to convince the good people of Ecuador and Latin America that we need these projects?
That's a very, very good question. It's a question that I've been battling with for the 40 years that I've been involved in the mining industry. And I don't want to give a flippant answer, but my initial reaction is the mining industry needs a Poldark effect. Because what has happened in the southwest of England, where we have the tin mining, and they've been mining there for 200 years, the mining is now finished. I was involved with the last mines that were in operation there. But they've turned the mining industry, the tin mining industry, into a fictitious, wonderful, benevolent history involving romantic characters. And everybody that goes to Cornwall now loves the tin mining industry and thinks it was great.
A brief interjection for our Latin American viewers.
Yes,
Poldark. Quickly Google Poldark. That's a great thing about these events. You can Google Poldark and you'll see what Keith is talking about. It's a TV series in the UK with a very handsome male role and lots of romance. But please continue, Keith. Yeah.
But we don't have a Poldark in the mining industry, and what we've been trying to do in the mining industry, and to a certain extent, we're our own worst enemies, because we keep having tailings disasters and we keep having incidents in the mine. All we can do is try and demonstrate the progress that we've made over the last 20 or 30, 40 years. Some of the mines that we have now, our streets are way, way ahead of the mines that we were running 50 years ago from the environmental impact point of view. Alfredo talked about the water usage. And I just want to correct one thing that he said, because he said we're a great consumer of fresh water. And the reality is that most mines in the world don't actually consume water anymore. They recycle the water. The water eventually goes to a tailings dam, and then it's returned to the mine, to the dam facilities. And we do our best to reduce the usage of the water. Then we've got to try and demonstrate the economic benefits that mining and the oil and gas industry can bring to the country. And I look at it as the resource that we have in the ground is worth so many billions of dollars that we've got to try and bring out. And in the bringing of that out, we provide jobs, we provide taxation for the country, we provide copper for the world, because it's going to be sold all the way around the world. So those are all positive impacts on the country. And then we will inevitably have to move some material. That's the nature of the mining. And we're going to have to store that material. We have to demonstrate that we can move it and we can store it, creating the least damage possible. And that's a story that we have to get out to the world. And that we are compliant with all of the ESG rules and regulations and governance. And from a SolGold point of view, our two major shareholders, BHP and Newcrest, and then our third major shareholder is BlackRock. And those three together make up over 30% of our shareholding. And those three are the most vociferous pursuers of the ESG aspects. So they're insistent that we have good governance. We've changed the board recently to improve that governance structure. As far as the safety aspect and health of the working environment, we've improved that enormously. We would basically the mining industry, which used to be one of the worst or the most unsafe places to work, is now much better than the construction industry, for example. So the league tables, we've moved down the league table of from a health and safety point of view. And so we've just got to use our opportunities like this to try and persuade and demonstrate people that if you've got a resource like we've got in Ecuador, we would like the opportunity to develop that resource, but we want to make sure we do it in conjunction with the government and in conjunction with all of the regulatory authorities involved in the country. And even if that means operating in what you described, a frontier area, we bring in partners that can work with the government and try and give them some understanding of what the mining industry is all about.
Excellent.
Did that answer your question?
No, that did answer my question. And because you're describing the fact that you can have these excellent, responsible, clean mining operations, but if people don't understand that and don't realize that, then you've still got the challenge. And I just want to tie in here with Marcela, because the oil industry is more established. Let's say in Ecuador, the oil industry is a lot more established than the mining industry. And Marcela, I just want to ask you about the impact of oil and gas operations on the fiscal side for governments in Latin America. So as I said, I'm sitting here in Ecuador. There was a first round of presidential elections about a month ago. And one of those candidates, he was basically saying that he was going to shut down the oil industry. He was going to stop oil. And people said to me, it's just not possible because of the pandemic. Ecuador is in a really tough fiscal situation. If you were to close down the oil industry overnight, maybe you could do that in Norway, I'm not sure. But if you were to do that in Ecuador, that would literally mean closing hospitals in the middle of the pandemic. It would mean closing schools. And that's the reality of the situation. I just want to ask you, Marcela, do you feel that the fact that oil is such a big contributor, and I don't know how much it contributes exactly, but I'm sure it's a significant part in the Colombian GDP, do you think that that gives the industry a certain level of political protection, the fact that it's already established and already helps Colombia with lots of things?
I don't know if I would call it protection. I think I would call it more like scrutiny, because oil definitely is a large part of Latin American economies. It is, and you know it, it is not only because there are large reserves, and especially in Brazil and Ecuador and Mexico, and they are by far largely dependent on those reserves and that income. And so is Colombia. I mean, even with our very low reserves compared to other Latin American countries, in Colombia, the industry accounts for between 30 and 50% of the exports, and it's almost 10%, 10 or 12% of the national income, fiscal income, 4% of the GDP. So it is important. It is an important industry. And of course, this industry is facing the conflict. It's a paradox. We may not like you because, you know, the pandemic through this whole climate change speech, but, oh, we need you because you're the source of a lot of development. And I think those two tensions can be perfectly aligned. Of course, we're not protected. We're going to be under a lot of scrutiny. And because we're largely dependent on the reserves, more so or less depending on the country, and more so or less depending in GDP, well, there is a political interest in, sometimes it's the interest because it's a populist speech, sometimes because it's truly environmental. But what nobody can deny is that in the short and medium term, there is not one single industry that may be able to replace the income that these industry is providing, and in general, the extractive industry is providing from these countries. Latin America was largely hit by the pandemic. I mean, we stepped back, I guess, at least 10 years of development. So this is not the time to waive the resources that are coming from these investments. In fact, probably because it has been politicized and there's so much needed, they are the topic of political campaigns. As you said it in Ecuador, it was in our last political campaign, and to date, we have not found the industry that would replace us. And I'm sure that at least in Colombia, it will be the matter of political campaign that is coming in 2022. So we'll see what happens in Ecuador, and where we have two projects by the end of April. That would definitely, we're seeing it in Mexico. 2 weeks ago, AMLO just declared that they will not be signing more contracts to private investors. So yes, it is politically driven, but that only remarks the importance of such resources for the country. I believe that we cannot waive the industry. I believe that Latin America, as you mentioned, we have 20% of the reserves in the world, 10% of the population, and as you mentioned, our demand for energy in the next 40 to 50 years is going to grow by 80%. So I think that we're here to stay, and it's not a matter of whether there is or not oil industry. It's a matter of how that crude is extracted and how we can demonstrate with indicators, and hopefully Alfredo is going to understand this, speaking the same language, because we have so many ways to and so many indicators to measure our performance. If we could align it, if we could all speak the same indicators, and we should all, let's say, target to the same place, I'm pretty sure that the oil and gas industry will be environmentally friendly, socially contributing, and providing all that energy that Latin America needs for the development. There is millions of people that should be moving in the next 40 years from poverty, out of poverty, and so many more people moving to middle class. That is only achieved through energy. And that's a responsibility of Erasmo and Keith and even the banking system and us to provide that safe energy for Latin America.
Perfect, Marcela, for such a comprehensive answer. In theory, this event was meant to have finished 8 minutes ago, but we're still getting lots of questions coming through from the audience, and it's an interesting conversation. So if the panel have no objections, I think we can carry on. There's still lots of people tuning in. There's lots of people asking a question. So it's such a broad topic. Look, I'm going to field some questions now from the audience. Firstly, Alfredo, you have an admirer. Someone's thanked you for challenging the industry to strive for better standards. So, but there's also some serious questions. Keith, what KPIs are used to report progress on green strategies?
Very, very briefly, obviously one of the key measurements that we take is we look at the costs. That's been the focus for the last 100 years in the mining industry. But what we're developing now are measurements of for example, the quantity of energy that we use to produce a ton of copper. So the kilowatts required to produce a ton of copper, the quantity of water that we use to produce a ton of copper. And that would then translate into some form of a carbon measurement per ton of copper. And when we've got those indicators, then we can start to manage much better the overall process and get a good understanding of that process.
And a follow-up question from the same person, I think her name is Rocio Salazar. She asks, how do mining companies prevent water pollution from discharged mine effluent and seepage from tailings and waste rock impoundments? Yeah,
it's all about capture. So we would build, wherever we build the mine and the facilities, then we will build a water capture or water catchment area around that facility. And that water then is picked up with a pump and taken back to the central reservoir that we would have for the water. And then ultimately at the downstream end of all of the mining operations, we'd have what we call a water treatment plant. And the only water that would be discharged from the mining operation would be water that went out through the water treatment plant.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Keith. I'm going to now move to Erasmo. Erasmo, somebody's asking, a lady called Margaret de Baez is asking, is ECB or BSBIOS listed on the London Stock Exchange? I know the answer to that is no, but perhaps something for you to think about here. There seems to be investor demand. And a follow-up question for you, Erasmo. Somebody else, Daria, is asking, how do you evaluate support from the Brazilian federal government in the development of green projects such as yours? So basically they're asking, do you think you're getting enough support in terms of legislature, taxation and subsidies in Brazil?
Obrigado pelas perguntas, que são muito boas. A BSBIOS ainda não está listada em bolsa. Nós estamos sendo, nos últimos anos, muito assediados por banco de investimento para fazermos a abertura do capital. Aqui no Brasil ou fora do Brasil, nós estamos estudando e talvez em algum momento a gente acesse o mercado de capital. Acho que é uma oportunidade boa, até porque estamos vendo aí mais recursos, mais dinheiro buscando investir e fomentar projetos como o que a BSBIOS e que a ICB tem. E aí, eu não posso deixar de citar o Alfredo, né, que citou muitas áreas de investimento, e dizer que o nosso segmento, além de ser verde, de ser green, de ser sustentável, ele é lucrativo. Então, ele gera também recursos, que é fundamental para uma empresa se manter sustentável. No que diz respeito ao governo brasileiro, o Alfredo também citou os exemplos da Colômbia, e eu, como brasileiro, não posso dizer que, na minha opinião, o Brasil é um exemplo para o mundo, porque nós somos o segundo maior produtor de etanol, em segundo maior consumidor, somos o segundo maior consumidor produtor e consumidor de biodiesel. Nós temos o programa Renova Bio no Brasil, que agora, além de nós vendermos o produto aqui, a gente pode também vender um ticket, que é o ticket de carbono, e cada empresa tem o seu ticket, tem a sua pegada de carbono. Então, realmente, o Brasil está muito, muito comprometido com as mudanças climáticas. Infelizmente, nós temos essa questão do desmatamento na Amazônia, mas a produção onde nós estamos a mais de 3 mil quilômetros da Amazônia, estamos totalmente contra o desflorestamento. E, James, o ponto que você traz, né, de usar, por exemplo, que as pessoas são contra as minas de cobre, mas querem carros elétricos e são contra os biocombustíveis, eu não vejo isso aqui no Brasil ou Paraguai, que eu estou muito presente, ou Argentina, né? E quando a gente explica que os biocombustíveis, quando produzidos de forma correta, respeitando o meio ambiente, eles ajudam a reduzir as emissões e produzem mais alimento, porque eles ajudam a aumentar a oferta de alimento, as pessoas entendem facilmente e apoiam imediatamente os biocombustíveis. Então, eu vejo que a aceitação dos biocombustíveis é muito grande. O que acontece é que muitas pessoas não têm o conhecimento. E fóruns como esse, eventos como esse, o veículo de comunicação que você representa, são muito importantes para levar conhecimento aos consumidores.
Excellent. Thank you, Erasmo. You will not be surprised to learn that I also think that this event is very important. We've been talking a lot about why we think Latin America, or why Latin America is a leader when it comes to the energy transition. You know, we've talked about its copper resources, its biofuel resources, its oil resources, but I want to tilt that slightly. Alfredo, I want to ask you, why is ESG investing so important to Latin America? Why is ESG investing perhaps more important in Latin America than it might be in London?
Well, this is one of the things we usually say to our investors in Europe, mainly in Germany. I mean, I many times I say, listen, your marginal dollar is going to make much more of an effect if we invested in Latin America than in Europe, continental Europe, or the US, for instance, because of the natural setup of Latin America, because of how relevant, I mean, are the things we are discussing. If instead of Keith and Marcela, we were sitting with the CEO of Netflix, and I mean, we would be discussing about how sustainable is his building, which is okay, but it's not really, it's not going to make a difference in terms of energy transition for the next 30 years. So if you're thinking about how would the planet be affected in the next 30 years, how your kids are going to, I mean, where are they going to live, in which sort of world are they going to live, in which industries, and what sort of standards will be guiding these industries, which they will work. Well, I mean, this is it's very important work we are doing, and I'm an enthusiastic. I mean, I've always been an enthusiastic for the region, apart from being from Latin America, but also I think that the ESG has a lot of meaning because of the particular setup, the industrial setup that we have in Latin America. We need to talk about the Amazon. I mean, Erasmo is 3,000 kilometers away from the Amazon, but he has to talk about the Amazon because he knows that on the other side of the panel, people are asking themselves, what are the industries doing in terms of making sure that we have something that belongs to the whole community, you know, to the world community. So this is very, very important. And as I mean, we talked before, James. I mean, companies that are doing this kind of efforts are setting also the standards for the next one. So I think that it's very important that Keith was mentioning. Okay, BlackRock is here. I mean, and BHP is behind, and we are setting the strongest standards. Well, I mean, for us as an investors, once we see that, for instance, if a company comes in and has a certification that the land they're using is 100% free of any deforestation claim, for the next one that we will invest, we're going to ask for the same certificate. So because this is setting the standard for the next. So if we look at the water management of a particular mining company and we like what we see, this is one I'm going to ask to this, I mean, to the one next. So what we are doing in Latin America has, I think it has and we wish it has a very strong effect. I mean, we are not here to really, I mean, do like a twist what we have been doing in the last years and just change a bit the portfolio that we were investing. This is not the goal. So what we really want to do, and we want to see these companies delivering on an adaptation and a transition. This is what we want to see. We want to see, and we are happy because it's not about governments. I saw, I mean, many, and in Latin America, we used to think, I mean, we tend to think that it's all about the government bringing the right policies, the government pushing for or pushing against. But it's not really like that. If you look at Brazil, for instance, you see how important ESG is. And it's not something that is particularly being pushed by the government. So I think that there is a lot going on. There is a lot of private and public efforts, very much decentralized all over the world. And this is a global effort, and we need to be there pushing the boundaries and bringing best practices elsewhere as a benchmark for the companies there.
Excellent. Thank you, Alfredo. Look, I'm going to look to wrap this up because I know you're all very busy people. But before I do that, I've got some final questions. And what I want to do is, we've been asking Alfredo what he thinks about your companies and your projects and your industries. And now I want to flip that around and really look at investors and the role that investors are playing. So first, I'm going to start with Marcela. Marcela, I have learned, researching this report that we produced recently, I was surprised to learn how sticky oil demand is going to be. Oil is going to be with us in a serious, significant way for the next couple of decades. And I would say probably for the next century, we're going to be using oil in some forms or the other. Oil is not going away. So I just want to ask, do you think, Marcela, that investors, generalist investors, not oil investors who are specialists, but generalist investors, do you think that they understand that? Because you read all these articles saying that oil is dead, carbon is being replaced by the electron. Do you think that investors really get the full picture? I wonder if people are carried away by all this talk of clean energy and they don't realize that oil is with us for the next few decades. What do you think? Do you think the investors understand that? And is it hard to sell that to investors? Is it hard to convince investors of that?
I believe, and I would support Alfredo's point here, that everybody thinks oil is dead, and it isn't at all. But it takes some in-depth analysis to realize that we're going to be here in the long term. And everybody probably thinks that the solution is just running away from it. But because consumers have such power today and investors have such willingness to participate in reducing climate change, I would, if I were Alfredo and if I'm IA, I would tell investors to stay, because investing in this industry is the way to influence it. If you run away, if companies just have to go out of the stock market, probably they'll do whatever they want. But having investors that care for the environment and having directors that represent those interests and having consumers know that they're represented their interests are represented, and the way we do things, it is the way to influence this industry and to influence positively in climate change. So my first answer would be, don't run away, stay with us. Stay with us, because by staying with us, you're going to make a difference. And because we're going to be, of course, we welcome scrutiny. We welcome that scrutiny because we are confident that this effort in changing and improving standards and creating metrics and really live sustainability from within, which is what we do. And probably Alfredo, you know us, we have SPEED, which is our value system. It stands for safety, people, environment, and development. So that is our ESG principles. And within those principles, we deeply encourage everybody in the company to truly believe that we're making a difference. So it's not just indicators, it's not just investors, it's really living from within. It's really convincing every employee that we can make a difference, and we will, within our own industry, in our business, but we're going to make a difference. So I will tell investors to stay and further read our reports. We're currently reporting under the GRI methodology, and we're eagerly waiting for the metrics to converge at some point. I believe it's IPIECA. And there will be a space for independent producers as majors step out of this business. So us independent producers, whether public or private, will have a definite role in making Latin America develop and in protecting our environment.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Marcela. I'm going to put a similar question to Keith, slightly different. Keith, I've learned a lot during this research of how it's basically getting harder to find new copper. So a way to put it is that if we were to convert every single conventional car or truck into an electric vehicle, we would have to use every piece of copper that has ever been discovered. That's, in an insane amount of copper. The world is going to need lots of copper. So that requires new projects. And because we've used a lot of the easy copper projects, that requires perhaps slightly more complicated technical projects. And I'm thinking here, of course, of Alpala, which uses a block caving method, which can take a bit more time, which can be a bit more complicated. It's underground. It's in a frontier mining jurisdiction. My question is, do investors, car makers, politicians, when they make these grand promises to be carbon neutral in 2050, do they actually understand? Do you think they understand the technical difficulties that involves? And if you look at your project, there might be slight delays to the pre-feasibility study, and that's because you're dealing with a complicated project. Do you think the investor community understands and supports
that? Great question, James. Ultimately, it boils down to price. The mining, the mining world has produced an awful lot of copper over the last 200, 300 years. Basically, that's been in the form of open pit material. Basically, that takes us down about a kilometer in terms of the Earth's crust. So talking purely technically, we think we can operate mines down to 4 kilometers deep. They've been doing that in South Africa. So the question is, is the world running out of copper in the ground at the moment? And the answer is no. But it's going to become increasingly hard to find, and it's going to become increasingly challenging to mine because, as you say, as we go deeper, it gets more technically challenging, and ultimately, unfortunately, that's going to reflect back to the consumer in terms of the price per pound of copper. So I would expect to see over the next 10 to 15 years, and the mining industry has been saying this for a long time, that the output from the open pits is going down, and the output from the underground operations is going up. Do the investors and the politicians understand that? No, not really, because they don't have the insight into the mining the overall aspects of the mining industry. I always think of the politicians, and I don't want to be critical of them, but they tend to think in shorter cycles. They're looking at the next 3 to 4 years, because that's when their next election's coming up, and they want to remain in power. Whereas we in the industries have to be, the Alpala project is going to be a 50 or 60 year mine, and so they don't look at it from the technical side at all. They look at it from the point of view of jobs and copper and taxes, as I've said before. But the great thing about the mining industry, and I think the oil and gas is very similar, is that we learn to adapt as well. It's amazing how once you started a mine and got it going, it's amazing how difficult it is to kill off a mine, because the mining engineers and the people involved and the employees and the investors, they all want to see it continue. And so rest assured that the mining industry will be able to supply all the copper that is needed for all of the green and renewable energy. And I repeat what Marcela said. We welcome scrutiny. We want to work with the world. We want to work with employees. We want to work with the populations of wherever we've got the mines, because we want to do it in the most environmentally responsible way, recognizing that the demand is going to be there for copper for as long as the human race is around.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. And just finally, I'm going to go to Erasmo, because we've just had a question from the audience. So we'll wrap up after this question. Erasmo, a gentleman called Kit Hobkirk has asked, with the UK government declaring its intention to phase out diesel cars, how receptive is the UK government to biodiesel? So that's Kit's question. And I would just like to ask you, can we expect biofuel produced by ESB to be sold in the UK or available in the UK anytime soon?
Obrigado pela pergunta. Sim, a gente pode esperar a venda dos biocombustíveis avançados serem vendidos no Reino Unido. Tanto é que uma das major oil que nós negociamos é a BP, e dentro dos mercados finais podem ser o Reino Unido. Eu visitei Londres antes da pandemia e realmente vi ações concretas que o Reino Unido está fazendo para mitigar as emissões de gases de efeito estufa, como o centro de Londres, onde tem um pedágio muito caro para você andar com carro, e também essa intenção de reduzir ou finalizar a produção de carros a diesel e focar nos elétricos. Eu vejo que, e por isso eu falei de transporte antes, né? Eu vejo que os biocombustíveis, no nosso caso, eles vão ser muito utilizados para transporte de pessoas e de cargas, principalmente transporte público. Eu acredito que o carro elétrico, ele tem essa vocação de estar presente nos veículos leves, né? Mas eu concordo plenamente com o seu comentário, né, James, que nós vamos precisar de quase todos os minerais do mundo só para fazer carro elétrico, e acho que nós vamos ter outras demandas. E concordando aqui com o colega que agora falou que o preço do cobre vai aumentar e outro preço de outros minerais também vão aumentar. Então eu vejo que tem espaço sim no Reino Unido para nós enviarmos o biocombustível, não para os veículos leves, mas para caminhões, para os aviões, para o setor de transporte.
Excellent, thank you. Well, look, we've overrun by half an hour, but it was worth every minute. This event has been attended by lots of people. Look, we're still getting comments, a fascinating discussion, lots of thanks from the audience. So I just want to convey that gratitude of the audience. I want to say thank you, Marcela, for joining us. Alfredo, thank you for joining us. Keith, Erasmo. And what I most enjoyed about this is that it wasn't just a boring panel where everyone slaps each one on the back and they exchange platitudes. There was a genuine debate. So thanks for all of you for helping to build that. Thanks for all of you for tuning in. And thank you to Canning House. It's a delight to partner with you as always. Thank you, Christina. Goodbye, everyone.